realize that is not easy, even for me. What I would like to do this morning, this is going to be a very different lecture. I usually never use PowerPoint, but this is necessary, as you will see. So I apologize for the PowerPoint. I've talked a little bit about neuroscience as we go along, and I want to give you some idea of what it means for language to be embodied from the point of view of the brain. And we've also talked about embodiment from another point of view, the point of view of interactions in the world and social interactions and so on. So one of the questions we had earlier had to do with Mark Johnson's discussion of embodiment of image schemas in terms of functioning in the world with your body. And that's correct. That is part of that embodiment. We also talked about Terry Regeer's study of image schemas and its embodiment in the brain. These are not two different notions of embodiment. They are the same, but that is not obvious. So what I'm going to do today is tell you why they are the same in detail. I want to do a few more things. I want to talk about what it means to have a concept, what mental simulation is, what it means to have a theory of mental simulation, and how this gives rise to a theory of meaning, and how a theory of meaning that is embodied could also be about the world. Those are important questions. I want to go through all of that. I also want to talk about the semantics of grammar and what kinds of concepts show up in grammar and how we can get a theory of what those concepts are. So, this is a paper done jointly with Vittorio Gallese of the University of Parma in Italy. He is one of the discoverers of mirror neurons, which I will discuss in a while. And all of the neuroscience data is from his research group, along with Professor Rizzolatti in Parma. So I do not do neuroscience. I'm a linguist, but I work with him, and we've worked on this together. What we found in going through his data is that there were a lot of phenomena that were never written up in the scientific journals because they did not know what they meant. And what we're going to do is go through them here and show what some of these things mean for linguistics. So let's continue. This is the Neurotheory Language Group at Berkeley. Jerry Feldman, Srini Narayanan, Lokendra Shastri, and Nancy Chang. Okay. There are certain assumptions about concepts that just about everyone accepts. Maybe one or two people don't, but most people accept them. One is that concepts are the elements of reason. That if you're reasoning, reasoning is a complex process, and concepts are the elements of reason. By the way, if anybody wants these, I can make the overheads available to Professor Lee, and so you don't have to take notes. You could just, he could send them to you, get a list, and they're yours. So if you don't feel like scribbling, don't worry. Also, concepts are agreed to constitute the meanings of words and linguistic expressions. Now, there is a traditional theory of concepts. And that traditional theory, we will see, doesn't work. But here it is. The traditional theory says that reason and language are what distinguish human beings from other animals. And concepts, which are the elements of reason, therefore only use human-specific brain mechanisms. That is, brain mechanisms that people have that other animals do not. That reason, therefore, is separate from perception and action, since animals have perception and action, and does not make direct use of the sensory motor system, since animals have a sensory motor system. They can see and hear and move and so on. So concepts are disembodied in this sense. That is, they do not have to do with perception and action in the world in the traditional theory. That's what this says. Now, we claim something very different, that human concepts are embodied, that many concepts make direct use of the sensory motor capacities of our body-brain system. We will say exactly what that means in a while. That many of these capacities are also present in human primates, that is, in monkeys. And one example, the concept of grasping, will be discussed in detail. So we'll take that example because it's been studied extensively, the actions have been studied extensively in monkeys. We're going to talk about what we call amodality. The traditional theory implicitly claims that even action concepts, like grasp, do not make use of the sensory motor system. As a concept, according to the traditional theory, grasp must be disembodied. Thus, the traditional theory claims that the concept grasp is amodal. Modality has to do, a modality is something like vision, or action, or hearing, or smell. Those are modalities. The claim is that concepts have nothing to do with the bodily modalities, vision, action, smell, moving your body, and so on. That they are amodal. Since the concept grasp is a concept, it therefore must be modality-free, even if the concept designates an action, doing this, even if it designates an action in a specific modality, namely, using the hand. Okay? So that is the traditional claim. Now, there are certain properties that concepts are generally agreed to have. Not everyone agrees on these, but almost everyone does. One, they are universal in the following sense. They characterize all particular instances. So, for example, the concept of grasping is the same no matter who the agent is, what the patient is, or how the grasping is done. Okay? That's what it means by universal. There's a general concept for grasping that works for all the kinds of grasping, no matter who the agent is, what the patient is, or how it's done. That's what universality means. Okay, secondly, the concept is stable, means that it doesn't change from day to day. The concept is stable. All concepts are stable. They don't change. The concept of grasping is not going to be different tomorrow than it is today. Okay? Secondly, concepts are internally structured. So we know, for example, that grasping has a structure to it. You start out by opening your hand, reaching for something, closing your hand, and so on. So concepts are internally structured. They are compositional. Compositional means you can fit them together. For example, take the concept of a bottle and the concept of grasping. You can fit them together to get the concept of grasping a bottle. Okay? Inferential. They give rise to inferences. For example, if I've grasped the bottle, then I've reached for the bottle. If I haven't reached for the bottle, then I haven't grasped the bottle. Okay? Simple inferences. There are relations among concepts. They may be related by hyponymy, antonymy, etc. So, for example, the concept of grasping is more general than the concept of grasping with a full hand, or grasping with the fingers, or grasping with the mouth. Okay? There's a hierarchy. That's what hyponyms are about. Concepts are meaningful. That is, they have meaning. They're not just random symbols or something like that. Concepts have to mean something. And concepts are independent of the words used to express them. And that's very important. Why? Because different languages can express the same concepts in different words. And the words can change over time. So, those are the general properties. Now, concepts can be either concrete, that is sensory motor concepts like grasp, or abstract, not sensory motor concepts like grasping an idea, which means understanding an idea. That's an abstract, not a concrete, not a sensory motor concept. So you have both kinds. And what we're going to do in this talk is introduce some basic ideas for making sense of concepts in neuroscience. Instead of amodality, that is no perception, hearing, or use of the body, we're going to talk about multimodality, where you have multiple uses of your sensory motor system, of using the body and perceiving and hearing and getting feedback from touch and so on. We're going to talk about the idea of functional clusters. These are high-level notions, and they function as conceptual units. I'll explain later what each of these is. We'll talk about the idea of simulation. That is, this is going to be necessary for meaningfulness and contextual inference. And then we're going to talk about the idea of parameters. That is, these govern semantic simulation, simulation of what you're doing, understanding it. And they characterize inference and they link to language. So those are the ideas that we're going to be going through shortly. Multimodality first. The action of grasping is not amodal, that is, it's not that, the action, as opposed to the concept. The action is multimodal because I can both do it and see it. So I'm using both a motor program, that one modality, the motor modality, and the visual modality. So it's multimodal. And we're going to argue that that allows for universality when we don't know it yet, but you'll see it. Functional clusters. These form higher level units. We'll talk about what they are and what they mean. They're clusters of neurons. And and they have an internal relational structure required by concepts. So we're going to show that. And we're going to show that there are two types, local clusters and network clusters. You'll see what those mean as we go along. Multimodality is realized in the brain through network clusters. And these are, in the brain, parallel networks between the parietal and premotor cortexes. That is, parietal cortex back here, premotor up here. There are connections between them, and we will see that leads to multimodality. Network clusters are formed by interconnected local clusters of neurons, and these are canonical and mirror neurons, and we'll see what they are momentarily. To understand simulation, to get the meaning of grasp, we must at least be able to imagine ourselves or someone else grasping an object. Now this is very important. Let's stop for a minute and think about the theory of meaning. What does it take to understand the meaning of the word grasp? You have to at least be able to imagine yourself or someone else grasping something. If you cannot even imagine anyone grasping anything, if you can't imagine it, you do not understand the concept of grasp. Okay? So that's the point. We're going to base the theory of meaning on a theory of imagination, and we're going to claim that imagination is done by neural simulation. And we'll explain exactly what that is. Okay? The conceptualization of grasping, as grasping is an action, and we make it into a concept that we can reason about and have in language. The conceptualization of grasping via simulation therefore requires the use of the same functional clusters in the action and perception of grasping. And we will see this momentarily. Now, all of this is based on a set of results in neuroscience. We know that visual imagination uses the same neural substrate as vision. Let me explain what that means. There is a part of the brain that is active when you actually see something. If I'm looking at this bottle, okay, part of my primary visual cortex is active, other parts of the visual system are active. Now, if you say, imagine that you can see that bottle. Imagine looking at that bottle. Right? Some of the same neural system is active. That is, imagining seeing uses the same neural system as actually seeing. The same is true for movement. If I go to pick up the bottle, a certain part of my brain in the motor system is active. If I then say, imagine picking up the bottle, some of the same parts are active. How do we know this? We know this via fMRI research. That is, we study what is actually going on in the brain. Now, since you can understand a concrete concept like grasping only if you can imagine doing it or observing it, the capacity for mental simulation, that is, the capacity for imagining it, for carrying it out in your head, is taken as the basis for meaningfulness. So we're going to say that a concept is meaningful only if you can actually imagine doing it, simulating it, either simulating it, imagining it, or actually doing it. Thus, action and observation together provide the basis for meaningfulness in the neural theory of language. Okay? So that's where we're going. Now, in order to do this at all, we need a very important concept, the concept of a neural parameter, very different from the concept, let's say, of a grammatical parameter. So, a neural parameter. All actions, perceptions, and simulations make use of parameters and their values, and neural parameterization is pervasive, and we'll tell you what they are. The action of reaching for an object, suppose I'm reaching for this bottle, makes use of the parameter of direction. So one part of reaching is direction. Parameter is like a part, a dimension, a feature. Okay? One parameter is direction. It also makes use of the parameter of force. If I'm reaching for something, I can do it very gently, or I can do it forcefully, or with medium force. Those are parameters, and they are governed in actions by certain clusters of neurons in neural system. And that has been discovered. It's part of what's known about neuroscience. The same parameter values that characterize the internal structure of actions and simulations of actions also characterize the internal structure of action concepts. Let me say that slowly. That's the crucial part of this. We're going to claim that if you look at the parameters that characterize acting and perceiving, the neural parameters, we're going to say that those same parameters, that is, the same clusters of neurons, are characterizing the internal structure of the concept as well as the action and the perception. Okay? That is the basic claim that we're going to be making. Now, let me stop for a minute and talk about the neural theory of language. That's going to be crucial in all of this. And that theory uses computational modeling mechanisms. It uses what is called structured connectionism, not PDP connectionism. Let me explain the difference very briefly. PDP connectionism, parallel distributed processing connectionism, is a model in which you have various layers of neurons which are connected to each other in all kinds of ways, and but just every possible way. And then you put constraints on it. That is, you give it an input, and if it makes a mistake, you say, one of the things it does is, say, categorize something as being, let's say, grasping or not grasping, or a word. It's either the word bat or it's not the word bat. Okay? Now, you put in something, the word bat, and you say, is it your bat or not? It may make a mistake. You put in the word cat. It may say, is it cat bat or not? And it will either get it right or make a mistake. And you can feed back the equivalent of the answer through this neural system. There's a way mathematically to do this. And what that does, it can learn all kinds of information in this bunch of neurons. But because everything's connected to everything else, you get lots of interference between the concepts. And circuits like this cannot control motor action, cannot do vision, cannot do language, and so on for most linguistic tasks. There are some tasks where people claim they might be able to do something in language, but for most they cannot. Structured connectionism has to do with the actual kinds of structures that you find in real brains. The PDP structures are very rarely found in brains. There are some parts of the brain where you have things like this, but most parts you do not. Structured connectionism takes the structures of brains, neural structures, and what it does is it makes mathematical models of them. So it says, if you have a neuron and it fires, let's call that firing value the amount of, let's say, chemical going down the axon. Let's give that a number, okay? Now, you have maybe 1,000 inputs to that neuron, each with a certain amount of chemical. Let's give them numbers. And there are multiplier effects in the synapses, so let's multiply those by other numbers, add them all up, and if you got enough, it fires, and then it goes down, and it goes to the next neuron. So with models like that, you can make mathematical models of neural firing, neuron by neuron by neuron, spreading out in spreading activation, for each neuron spreads to 1,000 others and gets 1,000 inputs. And models like that have been constructed. And one of the things that people do in our group is then model how such systems work. Now, that doesn't mean that we have made a full model of the brain or anything like that. What we tend to do is make higher level models of clusters of neurons, and we'll talk about those. But these are called localist models, and in them the units are not individual neurons, but whole clusters, and we'll talk about clusters momentarily. Now, localism allows the neural theory to characterize precise computations. That is, you can say exactly what each neuron is doing as needed in actions and inferences, not what each neuron, but what each cluster is doing. And because it uses functional clusters, it is not subject to a certain objection called the grandmother cell objection. So let me tell you about the grandmother cell objection. There was an earlier theory in which you have structured connectionism one neuron at a time. And people said, that's ridiculous for language, because neurons die. And imagine the neuron for your grandmother. If the neuron for your grandmother were to die, you would no longer know who your grandmother was. That just doesn't happen, right? So that's silly. But, however, if you have clusters, and what we will see is that there are clusters of neurons between 10 and 150 neurons for each concept, and those have been discovered. Then, if one dies, you've still got 149 left that do the same job. So that's not a problem with this kind of system. Now, the advantages of structured connectionism are these. Structured connectionism operates on structures of the sort found in real brains. From the structured connectionist perspective, the inferential structure of concepts is a consequence of the network structure of the brain and its organizational in terms of functional clusters. Let me say that again. The inferential structure of concepts, the way you can reason with concepts, the possible forms of reasoning, follow from the network structure of the brain, the way that the neurons are set up in clusters. That's what we will be arguing, and that's what this theory says. Now, structured connectionism comes with various mechanisms. One is a dynamic, that is, it operates over time, a dynamic simulation mechanism that adapts parameter values to situations. So in a given situation, you might be picking up this bottle with a small force or a large force, or you might be doing it in this direction or in that direction. So it allows you to adapt to situations. It is a neural binding theory. What is neural binding? Neural binding, in the traditional sense, has to do with when two things occur in different parts of the brain, there is a mechanism for identifying them and having them be understood as the same entity. For example, suppose you look at a blue chair. Now, there's a part of the brain that computes color and a completely different part of the brain that computes the structure of a chair, the image of a chair. So somehow when you see a blue chair, you have something in one part of your brain doing the color, blue, and another part of the brain saying, this is a mental image of a chair, and it fits that. But you have to be able to link them up so there's a single object, the blue chair. It's not blueness separated from chairness. It's a single thing. The name for this process is neural binding, and there are certain theories of how it works. Right now, the most prominent theory is that when the blueness and the chairness are firing in synchrony together, then you understand that as being the same object. We do not know that this is true. It is the best current theory. We know that such things do occur, but we don't know that it's the right theory. It could be a different way. There could be some other mechanism. But there is some mechanism for binding. We know the properties of binding, but we aren't sure of the exact mechanism. Okay, so what we have is a model for binding that assumes that you have simultaneous firing. If that's wrong, we could construct a different model to try to fit those other facts. We also have spreading activation throughout the network with what is called a probabilistic inference mechanism. Here's how that works. Probabilistic means that the values are between 1 and 0. It's not just firing and not firing. If you have a cluster of neurons, let's suppose you have 100 neurons in there, maybe only 80 of them are firing and 20 of them are not. So if that's the case, we have them, say, firing 0.8 out of 1. Okay, if 85% are firing, it's 0.85. But the amount of firing is probabilistic in that the value is between 0 and 1, and the model has a probabilistic computational mechanism for putting probabilities together to get new ones. Okay? So together, all of this mechanism, which is a lot of work, right? That's what these guys do at the Computer Science Institute. These jointly allow for the modeling of both sensory motor simulations and inference. Okay? Those are the mechanisms that are used. In the neural theory of, now by the way, you don't have to worry about this because there are other people doing this work. At least I don't have to worry about it because there are these other very smart people working on it. There are also fixed structures we call schemas, sometimes frames. Image schemas and frames are both schemas. A schema that structures an action has an internal structure that consists, just as frames do, of roles, parameters, and phases. A role, the agent, me, the patient, the bottle, the action, grasping. Okay? Or maybe other sub-actions like reaching, opening the hand, closing the hand, tightening the hand, lifting the arm. moving it moving the elbow towards your mouth, and so on. So those are roles. Phases. In the first phase, you open the hand and reach out. In the second phase, you grasp, which means you close your hand around and tighten it, and then you might, third phase, lift it and use it in some way. Okay? Those are phases. The parameters are force, direction, and various other parameters. Okay, now, that's what a schema is. That's how we characterize the structure of frames. The idea of multimodality, functional clusters, simulations, and parameters, those four ideas are going to allow us to link the neural theory, structured connectionism, to neuroscience. We're trying to link the actual neural modeling of the computation to what the neuroscientists have found, and I'm going to show you how to do it. So, let's look at the neuroscience evidence. In the sensory motor system, the neuroscience evidence allows us to characterize these aspects of concepts: universality, semantic rule structure, aspectual structure, what is called aspect in linguistics, that is the phases of an action, and parameter structure. And here's how it works in grasping. We're going to say that universality is achieved by multimodality. That is, when multimodal functional clusters for an action, like grasping, fire, when grasping is performed, observed, imagined, inferred, or heard. Any of those things, when that happens, we're going to say that there are certain neural clusters that are firing. The grasping can be of any type, done by any agent, any object, any manner, any location. When this happens, you get universality. So if you can show that there is multimodality for some functional cluster, then we're also showing that that functional cluster can play the conceptual role of universality for the given concept. So, in addition, there is multimodal integration. The premotor cortex as a whole, premotor cortex is over. Let me stop for a minute and tell you about the premotor cortex. If I perform an action, like lifting up this bottle and grasping it, two different parts of the brain are active, at least. One is the motor cortex, up here, where the neurons that fire control individual movements. For example, this, opening and closing the elbow, opening and closing the hand, turning, right? Individual movements. Moving the arm forward, moving the arm up, moving the arm down, going like that, like that, like that, that. Those are the kinds of movements controlled by the motor cortex. Okay? Very simple. The motor cortex does not allow for the integrated movement, for a choreography. Think of the brain as a choreographer telling each of the individual neurons here how to perform a dance. Okay? First, you've got to go move your hand out, you've got to do this, you've got to do that to do this. The choreographer is the premotor cortex. It has connections to the motor cortex, and what it does is it somehow, and in a way we'll tell you how, what it does is say, first do this, then do this, then do this, then do this, and so on. Okay? It tells you what to do and when, and then how much force to have and parameters to have. The way it does it is the following. There is a circuit with neurons connected to each other that fires in sequence, connecting all of these neurons in the motor cortex, and this one fires. When this fires, it says, because of the connection to here, it says, move your arm like that. The next one fires, it says, move it forward. The next one fires, and it says, go like that. The next one fires, and it says, tighten it. The next one fires, and it says, lift this. Now, how does it say it? It says it because the neurons in the sequence of, in the sort of string of, imagine a sort of string of neurons, here, 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 they have connections to the part of the brain here that do all of these things. So when the first one fires, there's a connection to the motor cortex that says, ah, it's connected to this thing, go do that. The next one fires, it's connected to this thing, go do that. Next one fires, it's connected to another thing that activates the part that does that. Okay? That's the mechanism. Okay? This mechanism has been first modeled by Srini Narayanan, the same guy who did the neural theory of metaphor in his thesis, their related work. Okay? And it turns out that the circuits that do this characterize the phases of actions. What comes first, second, third. And they also characterize aspect in natural language. That is, what is aspect about? It says some actions iterate. There's a loop. First you can tap and tap and tap and tap. Other actions, like walking, go on and there's no final state. Things that have a final state, like jumping, you jump and it's over, so on. That is, these circuits may have endpoints, they may not have endpoints, they may have loops, and then they indicate purpose. How does a circuit indicate purpose? It has a test for whether the purpose has been carried out. For example, here the purpose is having this thing in your hand and being able to control it. That's your purpose. Okay? So at each point you check, do I have it in my hand? No. Do I have it in my hand? No. Do I have it in my hand? Well, yes, but I can't control it. Do I have it in my hand and can control it? Yes. Okay? That is, you check, and when that condition is met, then the purpose is met. Okay? So that's the idea behind this whole system, and it's completely worked out. It's not only been programmed, it's been programmed in thorough detail. There's a new programming system that's been invented to do it, and so on. Okay, now, so that's the modeling part of this. The premotor cortex that choreographs these things is not a uniform field. Means it is not the case that every neuron in there does the same kind of thing. There are functionally distinct areas that do different things. And each of the premotor areas is reciprocally connected. That means connected both ways, with distinct regions of the posterior, back here, parietal cortex. So this is connected to this in 3 different ways. The premotor cortex is part of a series of parallel functional networks. By parallel, I mean that this is parallel to this, parallel to that. Okay? Now, multimodal integration. The cortical premotor areas, namely over here, are endowed with sensory properties, and that's very interesting. Because you have connections between the parietal cortex gets sensory information, gets information from the eyes, from the ears, from touch, and so on. Has sensory information, right? If there are connections both ways between the premotor cortex and the parietal cortex, then neurons in the premotor cortex are going to get information from the parietal cortex. They're going to have sensory properties and respond to visual, somatosensory, and auditory stimuli as well as choreographing actions. So that these parietal areas, which are traditionally considered to process purely sensory information, also get information from the motor areas because the connections are going both ways. So if you're doing something, there's also information going to what you can see, what you can hear, and so on. What you can touch, information about touch. So you get information going both ways. What that means is you're integrating various modalities. You're integrating movement with seeing, hearing, touching. Okay? Now, What the group, Rizzolotti's group in Parma, has done is, therefore, looked at the various parts of the premotor cortex and isolated all these different functional regions that work somewhat differently. We're going to be concerned with F4, F5, and this little ridge over here. Okay? Now, here are the various parietal networks from various points of view. These are networks that go like this, and so on. Okay, you can sort of see with these arrows what where they are. And then we're going to go through them one by one. In area F5, there are 3 classes of neurons that have been found in monkeys. With the monkey, they actually take off the monkey's skull and they probe and they find these things. There are motor general purpose neurons, and then there are visual motor neurons, which are called canonical and mirror neurons. Okay? So let's start with the general purpose neurons. There are 3 types that group has found for the monkey: grasping neurons, holding neurons, and manipulating neurons. And the kind of task they give the monkey is grasping an object, whatever kind of object it is, banana, a ring, something like that. Manipulating an object, getting a peanut and twisting it, and holding an object, getting something and just holding on to it. And they train the monkey to do each of these 3 things, and then they feed it if it does it right, and so on. They train it for a long time. They get it to do these. Now, in F5, let's look what's going on here. These drawings are what are called histograms. They show the firing of individual neurons. So you have a neuron, and you can see that it is firing right here. And this line in the middle is where it's doing the thing that you're interested in. Okay? So here's one firing pattern, here's another firing pattern, and so on. And what happens, let's say in A, here is a firing pattern when the monkey, for this particular neuron, we have one particular neuron, grasps something with its mouth. It goes and it picks it up with its mouth. The neuron fires in the premotor cortex. Here is where it grasps with the contralateral hand, that is lefty, the left hand. Okay? So it goes, it grasps with the left hand the firing pattern. Notice that the same neuron is firing. Okay? The amount of firing and whether it's exactly the same doesn't matter much. It's sort of the regular, it's the approximate amount that matters. Here, it's the ipsilateral hand, the same hand, namely the right hand, and it's firing there. That is, this neuron fires only when the monkey grasps, and it doesn't matter how. It can do it with its mouth or either hand. This is for general grasping of any kind, okay, at the level of individual neurons. And there's a group of neurons, maybe 50 to 100 or something like that. I don't have the actual numbers here. But there's a whole bunch of them that work just like this. Okay? Now, think about it. That's kind of interesting, because it's firing for grasping any kind at all. But what it's actually doing is something different with its mouth and with its arms. So, what do we know from general purpose neurons? What do they achieve for a theory of concepts? Partial universality. Their firing correlates with goal-oriented action of a general type regardless of effector, that is arm or mouth, or manner. That's how you do it. That's whether you do it like this or like that. Now, goal-oriented. It turns out that this firing only occurs if the animal actually gets the object. If it just moves its hand like this, nothing happens with the neuron. The neuron doesn't fire just for movement like this or movement with the mouth. It actually has to get the object. So its goal, it says it achieved the goal. Now, let's look at another part of F5, F5C, and its connection to a part of the PF part of the parietal cortex. There you have circuits that contain what are called mirror neurons. Now, mirror neurons are extremely important. This is a big deal for many reasons. So here's where you have to pay attention. If you don't remember anything from this lecture but mirror neurons, remember mirror neurons. Okay? Mirror neurons discharge, they fire when either the monkey performs one of a number of actions like grasping or holding or twisting the peanut, or when the monkey sees another individual, another monkey or the experimenter doing the same action. Okay? Monkey see, monkey do. Right? It is because there is a connection between the motor part, the premotor part that controls action, and the parietal cortex that controls vision. Because the connections go both ways. The monkey has, over its lifetime, these neurons have been tuned, the connections have been tuned in such a way that they fire when either the monkey sees someone else do the action or the monkey does the action. Okay? Now, this has also been found in human beings. So let me stop for a minute with this story, take a little story on the side, and tell you why this is incredibly important. This is the basis first for imitation, for learning how to do something by seeing something. You go and study martial arts, and the master says, look at me, do this, and you go and do this, right? The master says, do this, and you go and do this, right? Not so easy the first time, but you have to practice. Now, the idea is it's because of the mirror neurons that this is possible, first. Secondly, it has to do with being able to tell what someone else is emotionally feeling. Why? The reason is that when you have a certain emotion, it can show in your body. So if you're angry, you can see it in people's faces. People are happy, right? People are depressed, right? In many cases, you can see that because the muscles in the face and body reflect what someone's feeling. So if you can see what someone else's muscles are doing, and if that connects to your muscles, to the neurons that control your muscles, you don't have to be doing the same thing, although little children often do. You don't have to be doing the same thing, but that is going to be connected to your emotional system. That is, there's a physiology of emotions. So you will be able to feel what someone else feels. Sort of do a kind of mind reading. And this makes that possible. The name for this is empathy. The mirror neurons provide for empathy, and they exist in both monkeys and people, which means we evolved to have empathy with other beings. All right? Evolution allowed us to connect with other people and have empathy with them. And that's an extremely important thing to know, because the traditional theories of evolution said we only evolved to pursue our own goals, to achieve our own purposes for self-interest. And that's not true. We evolved naturally to connect with other people and have empathy. It's a very important part of human nature. Okay? So that's where this eventually will go in terms of moral theory. This changes all of moral theory. Okay? Now, let's get back to the circuit, okay, which gives rise to these mirror neurons. Now, so here's where the mirror neurons are, and let me show you how they work. And here's the evidence for them. Over here, if I remember all this correctly, you have the firing when the monkey sees the experimenter picking up something, grasping something. And then over here you have the firing when the monkey does it himself. Okay, and you see the same firing happen. Now, if here you see this same neuron firing when the monkey grasps something, but if the experimenter takes an instrument like a pair of pliers, not his hands, and grasps the entity, there is no firing because it's not the same action, even though the same effect is being carried out. Okay? So you've got to really do it with your hand. Okay? Very important thing. Here's what happens in the dark. The monkey can't see anything, but he does it in the dark, same neuron fires. Okay? So what you have here, these are other similar cases where the monkey is doing something. Oh, if the monkey is doing another action, some other thing, not just picking something up, but doing some totally different action, no firing. He sees somebody else doing the different action. What's that? Oh, see someone else doing the, thank you, doing a different action here, no firing, right? So basically, it's only then that you get the firing. Now, that is an oversimplified story. Here is the complicated story. 30% of the neurons work like that. That is, neurons fire only when you have exactly the same action going on. But there is what is called category loosening, and that is really interesting. And let me escape for a minute and get exactly what's here. In A and B, you have observed grasping. The monkey is seeing, here's a neuron there, the monkey is seeing some grasping, and here it's grasping with a precision grip like that. Here it's grasping with the whole hand. Okay? Here in C, you get the precision grip. You get a firing with the precision grip when he sees and observes somebody else doing this. But when the monkey sees somebody else doing this grip, nothing happens. Right? Over here, the monkey does either grip, it fires. Monkey sees this one, it fires. He sees the other one, nothing happens. Now, this is wild and interesting. Why? This is a special case of grasping. These are two special cases. This neuron fires when the monkey does any kind of grasping, but when he sees only one kind of grasping. There's another set of neurons that do the reverse. When the monkey sees one kind of grasping, what is the prototypical grasping for a monkey? This is a prototype for monkeys. But when he does only one. Okay? So what that means is that the subcase, the subcategory of precision grasping is linked in these neurons to the general notion of grasping. That is, hierarchical structure in semantics, linking the general kind of grasping to the special case, is present at the single neuron level. That is pretty wild. Right? If if you think about it, we have a hierarchy of concepts, right? More general, more specific. That is replicated at the single neuron level, neuron by neuron. There's a set of neurons that just do that. Right? To me, this is astonishing. When they first found that, they didn't publish it because they had no idea what it meant. They needed to talk to a linguist who said, ah! Okay. With a precision grip, PG is this grip here. Whoop. When the experimenter grasps the object, this is at the grasping. You also get a firing when he releases the object. Right? That is, thank you. There is a neuron that fires when in phases. It computes the aspect of grasping, the central part and the final part. There's other neurons that fire in the beginning part, when you're going to. That is, there are neurons that fire controlling the phases of the action. And you can find them one by one. Okay? Here, the experimenter grasps and releases the objects with the right hand. This is the left hand, same thing. Now, this is an interesting case. Here, the experimenter grasps with the whole hand, WH, and releases it with the left hand. And notice that you're getting firing at the end, but not much. This is mainly for the right hand. Here, you get the monkey grasping the object with the right hand, okay, in this neuron, and you get it nothing there. That is, it can both fire with releasing the object. So here's a neuron that fires when the experimenter is going through a phase, but only when the monkey is doing the central action. So it's linking my central action with all your phases. Okay? Here, the experimenter presents the object with the left hand. Nothing happens when the experimenter just presents the object. It's not grasping, so no firing. And here, when the monkey grasps this with the whole hand, this is with this grip, which is the whole hand. So when the monkey is grasping, this is for any kind of grasping, you get firing here. But with observation, with either of the graspings, you get aspect. You get both at two stages, here and release. Okay? So there's a link between the central concept of grasping and the whole structure, the phases of grasping. Okay, this is kind of nice. In this experiment, what you see in A is full vision. The monkey can see the experimenter grasping the block, and you see the firing. Over in C, the experimenter, there's no block. The experimenter is just going like this. No firing. The purpose has to be carried out. Over here in B, the monkey is grasping, the experimenter is reaching over here, and the monkey, let's see, what is going on there? It's hidden, okay? But the experimenter is reaching and has begun the action and then goes and grasps it. And during the phase in which it would be carried out, it's done. I think that, I'm not sure this is the monkey or the experimenter.
From A to B.
Yeah, it's A to B, you get hidden. Yeah. And then here you have hidden mimicking, no action. Nothing. So here, this is all, I'm sorry, I got this wrong. This is the monkey. The monkey is going and going like this, and you get firing over here. and you get the firing when this is carried out, right? When the purpose is done. So this is for purposeful grasping. It says when the purpose is carried out, done. And even if the monkey can't see his own hand. If it's carried out, done, firing. If there's just this, no firing in either case. So you have to get the purpose. Okay, so like humans, monkey can infer the goal of an action even when the visual, oh, I got it wrong. Yeah, yeah. Even if you can't see it, he infers the action. Okay. Now, these are cases where there's sound. And what you find here is that there are certain things like, right, when you break a peanut, you can hear it. Or you grasp a certain kind of ring, you can hear the metal and so on. And here you have the firing. Here are two different neurons, 3 and 4. Here's the firing in, let's look first at 3, vision and sound. Okay, the monkey can both see and hear, no problem. Here the monkey can see, but no sound. So you get firing again. Here the monkey can't see, it's dark, but can hear the sound. And so as soon as the sound comes, as soon as he hears the sound, the action hears, then you get this neuron firing. But not because he can't see it, so on. So what's interesting here is the firing anticipates the action. It's anticipatory when he sees it. He says, he is going to break that peanut. So it's going to start the fire. But with sound, when you can't see it, there's no anticipation, no firing. So that says anticipation of an action is built into these neurons. And this is what the actual motor neuron does. This is when you're actually doing it. Okay, that's what's happening. Same sort of thing goes on here. This thing is with peanut breaking and paper ripping and so on. Vision and sound, you get this with peanut breaking. If you only have vision and no sound, this neuron is not firing. If you have just sound, it's firing. And you have motor neurons here. So this neuron is tuned to both doing and hearing, but not seeing. Okay? So, to give you some sense of the richness of what's in the brain. This is an interesting case. Here you have, in the blue, foot action, hand action, mouth action, various things. This is with a human being. And it turns out that there are two cases. One where somebody's in an fMRI and they're asked to either perform an action with mimicking. That is, pretend that you're kicking an object, but there's no object there. So do this, but there's no object. Assume that you're grasping. Then here in the yellow, but no object. So you see that happening. Assume that you're grasping something with your mouth. You're biting here, but no apple. Here they give them an object. And what you see is that a region in the parietal cortex parallel to where the activation is for foot, hand, and mouth is done. And this could be done with the same object, like an apple. So the activity for understanding and representing an object in the brain depends upon what you're doing with it. Okay? This is a very interesting part. Now, how do mirror neurons work? Is this magic? No, it's not magic. They work by simulation. When the subject, the monkey, or you, observes another individual doing an action, like grasping, the subject, we claim, is simulating the same action. That is, the subject's brain is carrying out what he sees. I see you going to lift that, and I am carrying out automatically, because of my parietal cortex is getting the visual information. It's connected to the motor cortex, which can imagine, using the same neurons, carrying this out. I see this, I'm imagining what you're doing. Unconsciously, I may not know it, but my brain is imagining what you're doing and what you're going to do. And that is why you get the idea of someone the monkey, say, starting to see the peanut twisted, and you see the activation. But if it's just hearing and they can't see it, there's no activation. Okay? So the idea is that when you are when you see something happening, normally you understand it. If I see someone picking this up, I can understand it because I can do it. And when I see it, I am automatically, because of connections in my brain, simulating doing it. And that is what the understanding is. And that gives the basis of a theory of meaning. That is the basis of what is called simulation semantics. That is why we've gone through all of this, to show you what a neural theory of meaning is. And what's going on here is, since the subject observes another individual doing action, the subject is simulating the same action. Since action and simulation use the same neural substrate, that would explain why the same neurons are firing during action observation as during action execution. Now, what do we know from mirror neurons? We get partial universality because they code an action regardless of agent, patient, modality. That is, you get partial role structure. Why? They code an agent and a purpose role. Let me explain why. If you think about it, these neurons, when you see something, they have someone else, some other agent, doing something. They also fire when you do it. But the same neurons are therefore identifying you with the other agent. Right? And what they do, in order to do that, they are picking out an agent role, a grasper role. So these neurons have the function of picking out a grasper, of separating. Think of it this way. They separate the dancer from the dance. Right? You know the line from Yeats, how can you tell the dancer from the dance? You have a brain and mirror neurons, and that's how. That is, because you can feel yourself dance, and you can identify yourself with the dancer, you are separating out the dancer from the dance, the grasper from the grasping. Okay? Also, they distinguish purposeful action, where you actually get the object, from just moving your hand. Okay? So they distinguish a role of purpose from non-purposeful action. Okay? Now, so they also achieve category tightening and loosening, that is hierarchical structure, and some limited prototype structure. This is the prototype of grasping, and you find out that this occurs as a prototype in some of these neurons. Now, here's where that circuitry is. Here's the next group we're going to. We're going to F5AB, next circuit. This links the premotor area, F5AB, to the parietal area, AIP. And these are interesting things. These are called canonical neurons. Let me try to give you a feel for what these neurons do. These neurons fire when you either perform an action on an object, or you see the object you could perform it on. Right? I can do it if I see the bottle, or I grasp the bottle, the same neurons are firing. Okay? Now that's fairly wild. It says transforms intrinsic physical features of objects, shape and size, the things you can grasp, into hand motor programs requiring to act on them. Okay, and the things that have been looked at are manipulating objects, grasping, holding, and tearing apart. Okay? So these are canonical neurons. They're located along this ridge. And here's how this works. You have the monkey grasping a ring, and this neuron fires. But if it's grasping a plate, a cube, a cone, a sphere, a cylinder, nothing. Okay? A sphere, you might get a little bit of firing because of similarity of shape with the ring, but not much. Here, you have a similar case. Again, firing with the ring, but not all of these things. This has to do with what happens in the dark. Don't worry about it. It's complex. So, how did canonical neurons work? Again, by simulation. The sight of a graspable object triggers the simulation of grasping. The reason for that is you have connections between the parietal cortex and F5, but they're different connections. You're linking the patient of an action to the action. That's what this does. It links the patient to the action of the action to the action. So they achieve partial universality. They code regardless of patient, manner, or action. They code a patient role and a purpose role. They only act when you fire when you actually get the purpose. And they fire in the presence of the appropriate patient for a given action. Okay? So what you get so far is the coding of a whole lot of conceptual structure. Now let's go to the third circuit. This one links area F4 and VIP in parietal. Let me explain briefly about this. There's a notion called peripersonal space. Let me explain what that is. Take my cheek. If I touch my cheek, there'll be certain neurons firing. If I see something coming toward my cheek and it doesn't touch it, the same neurons will fire. Okay? The same thing. My arm, if you go to grasp my arm, you haven't touched it yet, the same neurons are going to fire as if you're touching it. Okay? So what happens here is, that's what all this says. Here's the places where it works. And the actions are head turning for looking at what's going on versus reaching with the arm and controlling it. And here's the monkey. Here's a monkey's face and its peripersonal space. So any entry into any of this has firing in this area. Same as touching any of this area. And if you put something into this region around it, it's the same as if you touched the corresponding place. The same here. Okay? Now, and here's the neural firing. You have the monkey and its region, and what you're doing here is showing what happens when you put something into space at various angles. Here, 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 and so on. And you see the amount of firing varying. The maximal firing is right next to the cheek. Okay? And this is the region in which you get any firing at all. Here is how this works in another experiment. We have something, the monkey is looking up here, and something is coming, not here, but toward the chin. I mean, coming toward where he's looking, this same thing, and you get some firing. Here, let's see what is going on here. The monkey is looking here. Ugh, I'm a little confused. Let me escape. Okay. In E and G, the neurons respond to an object approaching the chin. Okay, the sensory motive receptive field is located. So this is a neuron for the chin. Okay? This responds when you touch the chin. Something's coming toward the chin, monkey is looking at it, it responds. If the monkey is, if this is coming toward the eye, the one for the chin doesn't respond. Okay? Here, this is coming toward the chin, the monkey is looking down so he can see it, and you get a response.
It's the mouth, probably.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's coming toward the mouth, not the chin, the mouth. Thank you. Coming toward it's like putting something in the mouth. Now, here it says the chin, but it's probably the mouth. Here you have a similar thing. This is a neuron that fires when you touch here. If you have a probe like this going, woo, I'm going toward here, the neuron fires. But if I move over a bit, over the center line, I go toward here, not toward here, no firing. Okay? Here again, even if the monkey's looking away, I go toward here, firing. If I go over a little bit, no firing. Okay? So, how does that work? Again, by simulation. The sight or sound of a possible target. You see something coming towards your chin, and there's a connection between the touching of the chin, and seeing the area that allows you to see it. It's going to be the same as if it actually touched it, because you're going to anticipate it. You're simulating this action, and you're simulating it's going to hit the chin. Okay? So, these achieve partial universality, doesn't matter what the patient is, and they also code location of an action. They tell you location of where you're being touched or where something is moving. These are the experiments. All right, what does this mean? The premotor and parietal areas, rather than having separate and independent functions, are neurally integrated not only to control action, but to serve the function of constructing an integrated representation of actions together with objects acted on and locations toward which the actions are directed. In these circuits, sensory inputs are transformed in order to accomplish not only motor but also cognitive tasks like space perception and action understanding. They have phases, and there are other experiments that go through more examples of how phases work. And jointly, they characterize stability. The same neurons will function doing the same things day after day. They can cover all the particular cases, and they have an internal structure. They get semantic roles: agent, patient, purpose, and location. They have aspectual structure phases. They're meaningful because you can simulate and understand them. And of course, with the monkeys, they're independent of linguistic expression. In summary, these things would work in the neural... Now let's go to the neural theory of language. And I'll ignore this slide for the moment. Remember what Narayanan did about coordinating actions. You have in the premotor cortex connections to the motor cortex. I'm going to grasp this thing. First, the first neuron fires, I do this. The second neuron fires, I open my hand. The third one, I go like that. The fourth one, I go like that, and so on, because of the connections. Notice that all of these things are in different places. You have to have another circuit connecting them, which is what Narayanan was modeling. You have to have another circuit putting all these things together on top of it, and that's what Narayan circuitry does, in part. It pulls all of this together. That's modeled, it's not discovered in neuroscience. And it tells you what to do at what times. So it integrates it. And that allows you not only to do things in sequence, but also to infer, that is, if you're understanding it, if you're simulating this, you can say, oh, he's doing this and this, he's about to grasp. That is, you can make predictions. You can infer actions. You can do reasoning about this. And because you can link up the patient with the action and the agent with the action, it does some compositionality. Okay? So basically, if you put Narayanan's work together with this work, what you get is a theory of the concept of grasping as a meaningful concept. You get a theory of the meaning of the word grasp. Not just the action, the meaning. Now, notice what we've done. For at least one concept, grasp, a physical concept, functional clusters, as characterized in the sensory motor system and as modeled using structured connectionist binding and inference mechanisms, have all the necessary properties for concepts. Not just actions, not just perceptions, but concepts. Now, we have a neural versions of Occam's razor. Occam's razor says, don't postulate anything more than you have to. Okay? Under the traditional theory, action concepts have to be disembodied. That is, characterized neurally entirely outside the sensory motor system. That is, in the traditional theory, there would have to be another set of circuits to do all of this stuff for the concepts, in addition to what is doing it for the actions and the perceptions. But here we show that if you have just what's there for the actions and the perceptions, you get everything you need for the concepts. Because the same neural substructure is giving you imagination. It's allowing you to simulate in your imagination. Okay? Because of that, okay, you would have to duplicate all this apparatus in order to get, in the traditional theory, to get concepts. In this theory, you don't have to do that. It just follows from what's going on in the sensory motor system. Okay. So how does this work? What follows from this? Okay, now we start moving faster. We're getting into the linguistics. For each type of action, you have a fixed schema consisting of certain parameters. Role parameters like agent and patient, phase parameters like initial, middle, and final state, manner parameters like degree of force and direction. These are all represented down at the neural level. A grasp schema from the point of view of linguistics, if you're doing linguistic semantics and you're doing what a frame semantics would do, here's what you would need. The roles, agent, patient, agent, action, patient, location, the manners, force, type of grip, effector used, the initial state, the object is located in peripersonal space. If you're grasping, it has to be close enough for you to reach. I mean, you can't grasp it if it's way over there. Starting transition, you reach with a direction toward the object, toward the object location, opening your hand. Central transition, you close your hand with force, function, and how much force is a function of fragility and how much the patient weighs. The goal condition is that the effector, the hand, encloses the object with a manner, a grip determined by parameter values, situated conditions. A final state, the agent is in control of the object. That's what a linguistic description of grasping has to have. And that's what a concept of grasping is. To do reasoning about grasping, that's what you need. And that is what you get in the sensory motor system, without any special other parts. That is, says, the concept of grasping. The concept, as a concept, not just an action, is embodied. So what this does is fit the grasp schema to the neuroscience of grasping in each way. That is, each schema parameter is a functional cluster. Each parameter value is either a firing pattern over a functional cluster or some neural binding to a functional cluster, as when the agent is bound to an actor in context. And then there is what Narayanan calls an executing schema or an X schema. This is that chain that fires first this one, this one, this one, and this one. It executes an action. It's a neural circuit connecting the parameters of the fixed schema so that they can dynamically coordinate the firing over time and adapt their values to inputs from context. And note, the same neurons that are defining the fixed schema are neurons subject to, that is defining the fixed schema for grasp. We have a set of neurons that define once and for all what it means to grasp. These here, here, and here, but because there is a dynamic circuit connecting them, right? They can be activated by the executing schema during performance, observation, and imagination. Schemas are not like logical conditions. They run bodies. And that's what's interesting about this. Schemas are not abstract things here. They run bodies. And they do it as well as they can in real time, adjusting to real conditions. Now, how does this view of concepts differ from the traditional one? One, there are no necessary and sufficient conditions. Right? That is, they're probabilistic. Things can fire or not. They can do it this way, they can do it, adjust, do it a little bit differently the next time, and so on. That is, they're vague, they're probabilistic. There isn't an abstract representation. This is how you do it. It's just in your body. There isn't another representation of a concept outside of the body. There's nothing, no symbols. It's not symbolic. There's no symbols for the concept. It's just the neurons running your body. Okay? So here's why it's not necessary conditions. There are degrees, there are variations, extensions, and so on. Here's why it's not representational, because you're conceptualizing the world on the basis of how you experience it. We saw color is not in the world of heat. It's not a representation of the world. It's what's going on in your body. Since our experience is a function of our bodies and brains, our physical and social environments are there, so are our concepts, and so on. So that's important. These are all directly physical. They're not representations of something else. And there are no symbols. I mean, we can write down a symbol like final state if we are writing it down. But that's our way of writing, of symbolizing what is going on in the brain. There's no symbols in the brain. So in the theory of meaning, there's nothing symbolic. Meaningfulness and meaningfulness of concepts does not require symbols in the brain. The brain doesn't have symbols. Okay? Now, when we write down symbols like purpose or agent, that means we're representing a functional cluster of neurons. This says language is not modular. All right? You have connections between the modules. Mean there's a premotor module, there's a parietal module. Here they're working together constantly. They're multimodal. They are not modular. Okay? Many concepts which are part of language are inherently multimodal, and they exploit the pre-existing multimodal character of the sensory motor system. Concepts are exploiting the system of doing and observing, the sensory motor system, and they use the same system for conceptualizing. What about abstract concepts? All right? Some are about emotions, some are less concrete, like freedom. Conceptual metaphor accounts for some of these. That is, virtually all abstract concepts have conventional metaphorical conceptualizations like grasping an idea. Okay? And so we have metaphorical mappings from concrete to abstract domains, that is, neural connections, to characterize the meanings of a vast number of so-called abstract concepts. A vast number of abstract concepts are characterized metaphorically. Not all, which we'll come to in a minute, but a lot of them. Okay? Now, what are conceptual metaphors? They are, as we said yesterday, connectionist maps. They're direct connections, and therefore we claim that the sensory motor system is directly engaged in abstract reasoning. When you talk about grasping an idea, you're understanding your mind as grasping. You're activating the grasp schema in simulating it. Now, what's important, remember the difference between imagining grasping, which can be done unconsciously or consciously, and actually doing it or seeing it. When you do it, there's a connection from the brain and the motor cortex to your body. But when you imagine doing it, that connection is inhibited in the brain stem. So your body doesn't do it. You just imagine it. Okay? So here's understanding is grasping, and notice the reasoning patterns about ordinary grasping work for metaphorical grasping. So you can begin to grasp an idea but not quite get a hold of it, just like you can begin to grasp an object and not quite get a hold of it. If you fail to grasp an idea, it can go right by you or over your head, just like a moving object. If you grasp some idea, you can turn it over in your mind, like you can turn over an object. And you can't hold on to an idea before you grasp it. Okay? So the inferences are the same. They're the same inferential structure, just mapped over by metaphor. And the inferences are going on in the sensory motor system. They're going on in the with physical grasping, with imagining that, and then you map it onto ideas. And you have, that's what it means. That's where how the invariance principle works. It's because you're actually using the sensory motor system that the sensory motor system structure is used for the in metaphor. So, that's what I just said. These are used metaphorically. Now, I want to finish up with some new work. I want to introduce the concept of a cog. And let me try to explain what a cog is. It's crucial for abstract reasoning and for grammar and for many other things. Okay, let's go back to the premotor versus the motor cortex. Okay, motor, premotor. Whenever we perform a complex motor movement, like picking up a glass and taking a drink, two parts of the brain are activated, premotor and motor. The motor context has neural ensembles that control motor synergies. A synergy is a simple action like this or that. Right? Like opening or closing the hand, flexing or extending the elbow, turning the wrist, and so on. Complex motor schema is carried out in the premotor cortex. Okay? Now, let us call the motor cortex primary. In fact, that's what it's called, the primary motor cortex. It's right here. Because it's directly connected to the body. Okay? We call it primary, it's directly connected to the body. Let's call the premotor cortex secondary, because it has connections to the primary cortex that controls the action. So let's call that primary, that secondary. Okay? Now, what the schema that controls actions, this is what the executing schema, what Narayanan called the controller X schema, which controls action. This does first do this, first then do this, then do this. Okay. What he discovered is that characterizes aspect in the languages of the world. In his dissertation, he also showed that this can compute the logic of aspect abstractly. That is, if you just look at this schema, it computes the logic of aspect. How did he show this? By what miracle was this done? Here's how it worked. He took the notion of aspect, which is first you have the beginning of an action, then the middle of it. It might iterate, it might extend a long time, a short time. There might be a purpose satisfied, a final state, and so on. And what he showed was that for about 60 different actions, the same structure appeared. So you have lots of different actions, but all of them start, have a middle part that you iterate or continue, may have a purpose or not, may have a final state or not. If they have a final state, then they are perfective. If they have none, they are imperfective. So you get and when you look at it, it basically computes aspect. He then said, how could you show that the same circuitry that can move your body or can recognize other people's movements can do reasoning? How would you show that? And that's when he set up his neural theory of metaphor. He said, let us take a set of metaphors about an abstract domain, international economics. He then went to the business section of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and The Economist and collected sentences that used physical verbs like push and pull and fall and run and so on. And he got thousands of examples, right? In about, 3 seconds on the computer. Then he took about 30 of these examples and worked them out in this. Let me give you some of the examples. France fell into a recession and Germany pulled it out. Okay? Another one. India is stumbling with his feet. India is stumbling toward liberalization of its economy. Okay? So what he did was then figure out what metaphors there were linking the physical actions to the economics. And he worked that out, like a linguist, with a little help from his friends. And then he asked, could the same circuitry that could move the body do the reasoning about economics correctly, using the part about falling into a recession, pulling out, stumbling, and so on? And he showed that it could for 30 cases. Enough to make it look real. That is, the same circuitry that can move your body can do reasoning, which is just what we would expect if concepts were defined in the way we have just suggested. This is the controller X schema, initial phase, starting phase, etc., pre-central phase, and so on. This is how aspect works. All right? So this is what he had for actions. It's also for aspect in natural language. Okay? And this is the kind of, he used what he called Petri nets, and you change them, and so on. And here are properties of them, but we already talked about it. Now, what's interesting about this is that aspect shows up in the grammar of every language in the world. Every language has ways to indicate that an action is about to start, that it's in its starting phase, that it's in the middle, that it's iterating, that it's either long or short, that that it has duration or is instantaneous, that it is finished or not. Okay? Every language can say those things in its grammar. So the semantics of aspect, which is what carries this out, is part of the semantics of grammar in every language of the world. So that this controller X schema that Narayanan made up is part of the semantics of grammar. And where is it located? It's located in the premotor cortex in a secondary structure. Aspect by itself can fit any action. To fit an action, it would have to be connected to the motor cortex to carry out the action. So that if you don't have any connections, if you inhibit all the connections to the motor cortex and just run the controller schema itself, not saying what it controls, you get the logic of aspect, pure aspect. What this says is that the concept of aspect, all the aspectual concepts, come out of Narayanan's model of the controller X schema in this secondary structure, the premotor cortex. So here we have one case in which a secondary structure is showing up as the meaning of something in universal grammar. Let us call that a cog. Okay? Are there other cogs? Are there other cases where something that's in grammar has to be computed in the brain by a secondary structure with connections to primary structures? And the answer appears to be yes, that all grammatical meaning appears to work this way. Think of the primitive image schemas: containers, source path goal, contact, rotation, front back, up and down, all of Tommy's force dynamic schemas. Take, for example, a container schema, which presumably is computed in the visual cortex, according to Regier, in certain ways. It computes a generalized container, but can fit any shape at all, as we saw. Well, where does it get the shapes? By connection to the parietal cortex, where information about shape is registered. So it is a secondary structure that can fit any shape. It can fit the bottle, the room, the building, any shape at all, any size at all. But that information about shape and size is given elsewhere in the parietal cortex. So that means that the part of the brain that computes the container schema is also secondary. And that is true for anything. Something that computes generalized source, path, and goal for any particular one is going to be linked to, it's going to be in a secondary structure in the brain linked to primary ones, particular sources, particular paths, particular goals. Think about number for a minute. There's a part of the brain that computes number. It can tell 1 from 2 from 3 and so on. That part of the brain can also tell 1 bell and the sound from 2 bells from 3 bells, or 1 tree from 2 trees from 3 trees, either vision or sound. That is, it is in a secondary structure that can be linked to either vision or sound, which are primary. And number shows up in the grammar of every language. So it looks as if, and here's the cog hypothesis, that the meaning of grammatical concepts, the concepts that show up in grammar, are the concepts computed by secondary structures in the brain. That's the hypothesis. The concepts that show up in grammar around the world are exactly the concepts computed by the secondary structures in the brain. I do not know if this is true. It is a hypothesis. I think it's a plausible one. But it's a hypothesis to direct future research. Okay? Now, one more thing. I've done 2 more studies with respect to cogs. I have a book on the cognitive structure of mathematics called Where Mathematics Comes From. It's a book with Rafael Nunez. It's a nice 600-page book going through everything from addition and subtraction up through higher mathematics, calculus, imaginary numbers, transcendental numbers, etc. All kinds of stuff in higher mathematics, showing that mathematics is metaphorical in full detail. Now, the metaphors that we found in mathematics, let me give you an example what that would be. Think about the number line. You have a line, and then you will have along the line 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. Okay? In the number line, there's a metaphor. Numbers are points on a line. Numbers don't have to be points on a line. It's only a metaphor. In set theory, numbers are sets. 0 is the empty set, 1 is the set containing the empty set, and so on. That's a different metaphor. Mathematics is based on metaphors going from one branch of mathematics to another. Very, very common. That's how mathematics is built up. When you look at the details of these metaphors, they are all cog-to-cog metaphors, like lines and numbers. And that's why mathematics can apply to anything. That's because think about the meaning of grammar. A concept built into grammar can apply to any concept at all, any particular concept that is in the grammar of the sentence. Any special case it can apply to via links from the secondary to primary structures. The same is true of mathematics. Mathematics is abstract. What makes it abstract is that it is defined over secondary structures that can then be linked to any corresponding primary structures. That's why it can be used to fit all kinds of special cases. I have another paper, as long as this one, about art and form in art. I looked at art criticism, and it turns out that in art criticism, as done by certain art critics in the 70s who looked at things of this sort, the structure of a painting is basically image schema structure. You can show this is a center, this is a contained region. Here you have motion from here to here. Here you have a force applied in this direction, and so on. So it looks like image schemas are structuring art, and image schemas are all cogs. They're all secondary structures. So it looks like structure in general in human cognition is coming out of secondary structures in the brain, which then apply to, and why the reason they're abstract, they can apply to that. Now, the very last thing in this lecture, so this is the nature of cogs, so on. Nope. One more. Let's think about language acquisition, because that is the major place where cogs are important. We know from the work at the Max Planck Institute that when children learn grammar, they learn it one verb at a time. They learn a construction for a verb like give, where, I gave him a book or something like that. They learn a different grammar for a verb like fall or a verb like hit. So they learn these grammatical constructions one verb at a time, and then they, quote, generalize to new cases. The question is, what is generalization? And it used to be thought that generalization is a kind of induction. You get a new structure that is somehow, by magic, imposed. Now, this theory, the theory of cogs, says something different about generalization. It says that the secondary structure is already there in the primary structure. That is, if I am giving you something like this, I have in the secondary structure a source, a path, and a goal, and I have a force dynamics and an agent, a patient, and an object that I'm moving. And then I have the particular thing. If I'm handing you the bottle, I have connections to the fact that this looks like a bottle, has a shape like a bottle, that I'm doing it, that you're the patient, you're the indirect object, and so on. You're the recipient. So there is already, in the structure of giving, an abstract structure in the secondary part of the brain, in the premotor cortex, controlling the action. The generalization is already there in the special case. And what you learn is to inhibit the special case, the connections to the special case, so that you can then have connections to new cases. So generalization is not learning something new, it is inhibiting connections to the old special cases. When you do that, you can then make connections to new special cases, but you already know the generalizations because they are part of the special cases. Right? That's something that's true of the neural system, of the human brain. It's not something that's abstractly true of a mathematical system. It's certainly not true in a mathematical system. So if you try to understand language acquisition in terms of an abstract mathematical system, you'll never reach this conclusion. But if you do it in terms of a neural system, you do. Thank you.